What's up YouTube? Fred here. Welcome to Fred's Full Throttle. Today we're going to talk about how can you afford your dream car. Whatever that is, I'm going to help you figure out how you can afford it. So today's video is part of a two-part series. My last video was how did I afford the C7 Grand Sport that I currently own, and this video kind of builds on that with some of the same themes, but this is how do you afford that next step, that really expensive car. You know, the Corvette's expensive, but what if I want to buy a Lamborghini or a Porsche or a Ferrari or something like that? So I'm going to cover a number of things that are really, really important if you want to do that. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and we're going to take the next like 15 minutes or so and talk through this. So I'm going to go over these in no particular order. So the first point I want to cover is that you need to have a reliable daily driver. You don't want to be spending lots of extra money on repairs and on fixes and on just keeping the thing on the road. I own a Toyota Tacoma. It's a 2007. I bought it new back then and I've done all the factory services and stuff on it, but I've had it now, this is going to be the 14th year I've owned it, and it's got, I don't know, somewhere around 180,000, 200,000 miles on it, and it still drives, it's still great. It's not anything pretty to look at, the interior is kind of worn down, but it gets me from A to B, and it's a reliable vehicle that I don't have to put a whole bunch of money into. That's going to be important if you're trying to save up for something super expensive. The next, and I would say probably the most important part of saving for something like a dream car, is having a commitment to that goal. And so that's really important. If you're saving up all this money, every so often you're going to look in your bank account and you're going to see this pretty big chunk of money that's going to keep growing over time. You need to be able to look at that and not fritter it away on other things. Now that's a lot harder than it sounds. It took me 6 years to save for the C7 Grand Sport, and my down payment was $40,000, which for me, who I'm not a millionaire YouTuber, I'm just a normal guy, that's really, really a lot of money. And so being able to turn down those things and being committed to that goal is super, super important. So once you kind of make that mental mindset and say, this is the thing I want and this is what I'm saving for, barring an emergency or something where you don't have a choice to spend the money, you're not going to dip into those savings to spend for something else because that's going to set you back on that progress. And it's already going to take a fair amount of time to save up. All right, so the key that I found, and I don't know if other people have done this, but is rolling whatever payment was going into that daily driver, once that's paid off, into monthly savings for this thing. So that was the biggest source of income for me to save for the Corvette. And currently that's exactly what I'm doing for saving for my next goal, is taking that payment. For me, it was $420 a month that I had spent on the Tacoma. It was $420 a month I had spent on the Corvette. Once the Corvette was paid off, that money is now all going into savings. You earmark it for the thing you're saving for and treat it like an ongoing bill. Even though it's just going into your own bank accounts, you will never get used to having that money and then spending it on other things. So that's super important. And that's probably going to be, for most people, the biggest way that they can get a large-ish chunk of money every month towards something like this. Another point, which it probably is a little bit further down the road when you're getting closer to buying, but is figuring out between what you're willing to pay monthly and what your down payment is, working backwards to figure out what kind of car can you afford. So if I know that I want to pay, let's say, $20,000 on a loan, and I know that the car is $100,000, just as an example, it means I need to be able to come up with $80,000 in order to do the down payment so that my car payment for that is an affordable thing. Now certainly you can save and pay for the whole thing up front with cash, but given the interest rates in today's markets, you may end up being better able to leverage that money by taking a moderate sized loan, something you can easily afford, but that allows you to get the car sooner because you'll just do a down payment and then pay those monthly payments. So figuring out what you can afford. Now if I want to buy a Huracan, for example, and it's $230,000, and I only want to have a $20,000 loan for it, that means I need to come up with $210,000 in order to buy that car. So that's sort of how that works. The next thing you want to do is you want to have a high yield savings account and have that be dedicated for this. And there are a couple reasons for that. One, you go to like Bank of America or Citizens Bank or any of them, kind of the big chain banks, you're not going to get a really good interest rate no matter what on a savings account. Tell me if this is familiar. You go and you look at your savings like, oh, I've got a couple $1,000s in here, and you go and you look and you're like, over a month, I only earned like 18 cents in interest or 5 cents in interest. And some months you don't earn any interest. That's not going to help you at all. Now, certainly, even a high-yield savings account, with a couple $1,000s in it, you're only going to earn $5, $10 a month or something. But that's actual dollars that can go towards something, whereas a normal savings account, you're not. The other benefit of doing that is it's a little bit of separation from your normal checking accounts. And I did it through a separate brand. So I had one brand for my normal checking and savings, but then I had a separate account, which was owned by another bank, and that's where my money goes. And that makes it so that I'm not even seeing those amounts over time. The next step is obviously if you're going to be spending tons and tons of money on something really expensive, is just rolling a car payment into it isn't going to really cut it if you're trying to get something super expensive. So another way that you can achieve this is to look at your accounts and say, I can afford an extra $50 a month or $100 a month or whatever that is, or per paycheck, and put that towards the account, treating it like a bill. Schedule it, get it on your calendar, set reminders, and every month religiously pay that amount towards that savings account. Just transfer the money in, and that's going to add up pretty quick. Just as an example, $50 per paycheck if you're paid twice a month works out to $100 a month. That's $1,200 a year of additional savings. Now, if you can do more than that, then that's even better, but that will be some additional kind of a pipeline for that money to end up in that account. So the next point I wanted to cover, and it rolls back into what I mentioned a minute or two ago, is making your money hard to access for that savings. And so what that means is I have my checking account and my savings account in my primary bank where my paycheck is direct deposited. But then I have that separate account. As I mentioned, I have a high yield savings account. What I meant by separation, though, is so that you don't have the temptation of seeing that big number in your normal savings account. Separate from not earning much interest, having it there makes it more accessible and easy. By separating it to another bank and then having to have a process to transfer money in or out, it means that you need to have that commitment I mentioned earlier, but also that money, oh, hey, I want to spend $1,000 on this new gadget or something. I can't just go and transfer the money and pay for something. I actually have to think about it. It takes 3 days for that money to then transfer back into my normal savings. And that 3 days really makes you think about it. Is this important enough? Do I really want to set myself back by whatever amount? And so having that separation, as silly as it sounds, that's actually a bit of a psychological trick so that you're not tempted by the money that you have, because you're not seeing it all the time. You're not seeing it every time you log in. The next one, any extra windfalls of money you get, whether it's a birthday card with $50, whether it's a bonus at work, whether it's some good tips if you work at a restaurant, take that extra money and put that into those savings. So I shouldn't generalize, but over time, you'll actually see that those extra bits add up. All right, so we've got the car payment, we've got that extra $50 or $100 a month potentially, we've got some of your extra money that, hey, I got a birthday card from grandma that's got some money in it, going and putting that in. And actually I would say this is probably my second biggest way of saving for something is at the end of the month, if you've paid all your bills and you have some extra money in checking, don't leave it there. Take that extra money and put that into savings. And that extra money, some months, hey, it was a tight month and I didn't have any extra, fine. But you may have a paycheck, you may have a month where, hey, you know what, I came out $100 ahead, or I came out with a $50 extra. That can add up over time, and especially if you're pretty good with your finances, you don't have a lot of extra debt, and you're not buying a lot of kind of extra things, you'll actually find that, hey, those bits actually add up pretty well. And for me personally, I try to have all my bills paid, and if I have any extra money, even if it's $5, I then go and I put that into that savings. So I should qualify. Do that once your next paycheck hits. You don't ever want your checking account to be at zero. That's not a good idea. But you can take that extra money, and that actually becomes a fairly regular thing. And after a while, it becomes a habit. You aren't tempted by that money. It's sitting in something that might be earning you some better interest, and that actually adds up pretty significantly over time. For me, other than that car payment that's going into savings, this is actually probably the second biggest way that I've saved up money to buy the Corvette, and I'm saving for whatever my next car is. So this next one's a little bit different, and this is if you have anything that you want to buy that isn't part of your normal routine, isn't part of your normal expenses or bills, wait a week before you buy it. If there are those things out there and you're like, normally you just kind of go and impulse buy it, and sure, you can afford it, not a problem, but think about it a little bit. Say, okay, I'm going to put a calendar reminder, hey, I wanted these sunglasses. Put it in to remind you in 1 week, do I still really want them? You know, maybe do a little homework on it, but think about, is that expense worth delaying buying that thing that you really want down the road? It makes it easier if you have a definite goal that you're going for, but you can take that thought of like, oh, I want to buy this thing, maybe put it on a list, and if in a few months you still want it, sure, go buy it for yourself. But for all that kind of impulse purchasing, try to rein that in a little bit. Hey, do I need a coffee from Starbucks every day or Dunkin' Donuts? Maybe not every day. You know what? I'll make some coffee at home, and once a week I'll go out and get coffee and take that extra money, and you're not spending it. So at the end of the month, with that last point I made about taking that leftover money, put that into savings. So that will help kind of curb that impulse buying and keep you focused on the long-term goal, which is buying that awesome car. So this next one is actually pretty fun, and that is doing your homework on the cars in the meantime, knowing at any given moment, if you somehow had the money to buy the car, which one would you be most interested in, and like which direction you want to go. And there's actually a pretty good reason for this. And it's not to tempt yourself and be like, oh, I can't afford that thing for a few more years. Instead, it's actually to keep that stoke really, really high for the thing that you're saving for. If you feel motivated and you're excited about that big purchase and you know that that car is coming, it'll be a lot easier to save for it because it's important to you. If you, oh yeah, I kind of wanted this car, and you save for a year or two, but then it's like, do I really want it? Or do I want this cool like other thing? Going and seeing the cars at a dealership, go to Cars and Coffee, go to car events, do your homework online, watch YouTube videos about whatever that thing is, and keeping that stoke high will make it a lot easier to save for it because you're excited. You're like, what if I was in that thing? And instead of that person driving the video, what if it was me driving that car? And how cool would it be if I showed up at the next Cars and Coffee with this sweet new car? That will help you keep that motivation going. And so I would say, do all of that homework throughout the process of saving. And especially one thing you may find is that over time, your goal on what you want or the target car or even the target price may change. So the next point that's going to help you on this is don't test drive the car or the prospective cars until you're a lot closer to buying, and ideally until you actually have the money in hand. And the reason for that is that you will, as soon as you test drive some of these cars, you're going to be like, take my money now. I don't care if I have enough. I want to go and buy that car. And that's going to unfortunately push you down the path of having either a loan that's too big or depleting your savings completely and not having that safety net. And so everybody's different, but for me personally, I only test drove the Corvette, the M2, some of those other cars at the point where I had the money, or at least within $1,000 or so, when I had the money to afford them. And that made the experience totally different. You know, it's one thing to go into a car dealership and look at something and kind of be so excited for it, but no, hey, that's way outside my budget, or it's significantly outside my budget. You know, that's $10,000 more than I have in savings right now. And it's good to look at it and keep that motivation, but when you take that step and you test drive it, it becomes a lot harder to say no and to stay committed and do it the right way and not impact your other finances. So my advice, and from my own experience, would be only test drive when you're finally at that point. It's gonna take some time, and it is super, super special and a lot of fun. And I would say test drive every single car that's even remotely in that price range at the point where you can afford it, and you'll enjoy the process because you'll know, wow, if I love this car, I can buy it tomorrow, rather than, wow, now I really, really love the car, and I know I've got 3 more years of saving for it, which that's, for me at least, that would be a very hard thing to just sit back and wait. I test drove the Corvette about 6 to 7 months before I bought it, and I was a couple thousand less than what I really needed to have, but I was close enough that 6 months doesn't seem that long, and especially I test drove it in the fall, and I knew I had the whole winter ahead of me, so I wasn't going to be able to drive the car even if I could have bought it, so that made it a little bit easier. So you can kind of fudge that a little bit, but something to keep in mind. So another area that can help is figuring out, do you want to take a loan or do you want to just pay outright for the car? And that's going to change for everybody. Some people, you know what, if the loan rates are good and interest rates are high, you know, for savings or for investing, maybe you're better off taking a loan and just having that money in savings and then just doling out payments. There's going to be the whole spectrum. But the way that worked out for me is that I had originally thought I was going to buy either a Subaru WRX, or I actually ended up putting money down on a Ford Focus RS. I wanted all-wheel drive, I wanted 4 seats, and I wanted something that I could use as a daily driver but also have that fun. And it was sort of an epiphany that my wife was like, well, hey, are you planning on keeping the truck? You know, because we go to the transfer station in our town, we go to Home Depot and we buy, you know, a truckload of mulch. If you're going to keep the truck, why do you need a 4-season car? And I was like, that's actually a really good point. And that changed for me. You know, I was looking to save like $40,000 to buy the Focus outright. But instead, I was like, well, what if I put $40,000 as a down payment? That instantly gave me a much higher price point that I could look at, still afford comfortably, but actually just taking a loan and making the same payment I was currently saving for myself and every month going into that savings account. Now that became money that I could then leverage towards that car, and I bought something much, much better, which was the C7 Grand Sport. So think about that when you're trying to figure out, do I want to pay outright or do I want to take a loan? If you're thinking of paying outright, that may be perfect, but it also may be something of, wait a second, if I can leverage that towards a down payment and have a loan that's a reasonable price, maybe that enables you to get something a little sooner. So this point's going to be a little bit debatable, but what I would say, and this is only from my own experience, set an attainable goal and then use that as a stepping stone to get to the real dream car thing. Now certainly, maybe you drive, you know, just an everyday average daily driver car, a Honda Civic, a RAV4, something like that. That's cool. And you're like, I want to buy a Lamborghini. I want to save up $300,000 and buy one. Now that's probably not what most people are thinking at that point, but that might be your goal. Instead, what I've done and kind of my approach is buy something fun that will hold you along the way, because to save for that big thing, it's going to take a lot more money. And so for me, it was save up, buy the Corvette, and especially, like, I will be honest, at the time, I never even thought about, could I ever afford something a lot more expensive? And I'm still even on the fence about it. Rather than buy a brand new Porsche or something really, really expensive, maybe I could buy like a couple-year-old used Cayman, do some modifications to it, and have a lot of fun with that and not spend $150,000 plus on a car. So those are some of the thoughts I'm going through. But in the meantime, I've got this Corvette. I love driving it. It's the most fun vehicle I've ever had for my own, but also it's one of the most fun things I've ever driven. And I've driven Lamborghinis, I've driven Porsches on the track. Like, I've done a lot of those cool things, and having your own makes it a lot easier to save for something else because you saw the fruits of that return for you in buying something in the middle. So what it might be, yes, you want that Lamborghini, but you're also only 20 years old, let's say, and you're like, you know what, I have a whole lifetime to save for that, but you know what? I really would love to have the new Camaro or the new BMW M2 or something in the middle. Plus, when you get to that other car or you're saving for it, maybe you take that car that you've bought in the meantime, and that can also roll into the payment. You know, the return on, let's say, a $50,000 sports car traded in towards something or sold, and then that money leveraged towards it, you're not losing the full value of that car. You're going to end up with a big additional chunk. And so one of the things I have to think about is if and when I decide to buy my next really expensive car, do I trade the Corvette towards that, or do I try to keep the Corvette and go for something else? So it's all stuff you can play around with, but getting an intermediate car, something you love but isn't that, you know, blue sky dream of the Lamborghini or the Ferrari, that might be something that appeals to you. So keep that in mind. So a big one here, and another one to mention, is to not let the saving for that thing really impact your life. You don't want it to change your quality of living. You don't want it to change your ability to pay for other expenses. And you don't want to spend all your time saving for this thing when it's 10 years out or 7 years out and not be able to enjoy life right now. So certainly go on vacations, do fun things, splurge every once in a while. Don't live your life completely focused on this one goal, because no one knows what's going to happen. You could get hit by a meteorite tomorrow or lightning or something, or your life circumstances could change dramatically and maybe owning a car doesn't make sense at some point. So you don't want to completely get into that bucket and not do anything else. So keep that in mind, that it's all about balance, and as long as you're saving aggressively for it, it doesn't mean save every last penny. It means live your life and enjoy it, but don't let it affect your normal finances, and don't lower your standard of living just so you can afford that thing a little bit sooner, unless that's a worthwhile trade-off for you. So I would say one other piece of this, and I think I alluded to it earlier, is have a little bit of extra savings. I know I mentioned it in my last video, but have a little bit of extra savings when you buy that car. You know, a couple thousand, 10,000, whatever that is, so that if something unforeseen comes up, your daily driver needs a major repair, you have your furnace in your house fails, something like that, have some extra money. And I'm certainly not an investment advisor. I don't want to get into that can of worms, but have some extra money, because there's going to be some things that come up that you don't expect, and you want to be able to afford that. So when you're buying something expensive, you don't want to deplete your savings. You want to still have something that you hold back. Playing right into that, and kind of the next point, is there are going to be expenses just from when you buy the car that you didn't count on. For me with the Grand Sport, that was the case. I went to the dealership, we figured out the car, we agreed on a price, perfect, everything's good. And then they're like, well, wait a second, do you want a car cover for it? There's $100. I wanted Expel on the car. The dealership does it so I could have that done before it's driven to my, carried to my house, before I take delivery. There's $3,000. There were a couple other incidental expenses, plus I had excise tax when I registered the car. So if you have a round number in your head, like, oh, hey, this new car is $100,000, factor in a couple thousand, probably like 5,000 more on top of that, so that you can cover any of those kind of last minute pop-up expenses. And so for me, one of those other expenses was, we had agreed on everything. I knew what my down payment was. I knew what I wanted my loan to be. And there was actually about a $1,500 difference that I needed to pay out of pocket in order for my loan to be at the number I wanted. And I was much more willing to pay a little bit extra up front out of pocket, extra $1,500, so that my monthly payment was the exact number I wanted, because I was going to be paying that for the next several years. So keep that in mind. All right, and so the last point that I want to make, the last thing that I'd written down and kind of thought about, was having this dedicated savings account I mentioned, and having a normal checking account, and using that as a clearing account to get into that savings. And what I mean by that is, you don't want to take, okay, let's say it's that car payment or that extra amount, per month that you're putting in. You don't want to just always put that in that remote account that takes 3 days to get the money in or out. Take that and put that into a local savings account on your primary bank, whatever that bank is. Every so often, and I do it through milestones, so I'll say I want to have $2,000 in my savings account at any given time, so that if I have an incidental expense or something I can't plan for, it's right there. If there was a mortgage shortage or something else, I have that $2,000. But then what I do is I'll say, like, every extra $1,000 or every extra $2,000, when I've added that up in my normal account that's savings, transfer that over to the other account. So you're always keeping some money liquid in your normal savings. Certainly you're not earning as good a return on it, but you also have that money in a safety net type scenario where you need it quick, you don't want to or can't wait 3 days to transfer money back in. So that's what I do, is I have my normal checking account with my direct deposit. At the end of the month, if I have that extra money or I make that car payment into my savings, I take that, put it in my normal banking savings account. Then, after I've saved up an extra $1,000 or $2,000, I take that money and that goes into this kind of remote savings account, in my case, a Capital One 360, and that account is where the interest grows, and I don't pull money out of that unless I absolutely need to. And actually, in the time that I've been doing this, I've never had to pull money out other than for a new car or some other major expense that I was saving for specifically. Plus, you can build a couple of those accounts so that you can be saving for a car, saving for a trip, saving for whatever, have a good return, but you're not actually risking that money or making it hard if you do have an expense that you can't cover immediately. Having that safety net available is really important. So anyway, I hope this was valuable. I know this was kind of long, but these are all the types of things that I've thought of and kind of practiced what I preach in order to save for both the Corvette as well as whatever my next big purchase is. I've got something coming up on the channel, hopefully in the next year or so, that should be pretty exciting and pretty interesting. There's going to be a bunch of videos about it, and I'm not going to share that quite yet, so maybe subscribe to the channel if you're curious. And thank you for watching. Until next time, spread out!